First talks since Russia's invasion, now in its fifth day. Ukraine says it is demanding a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops from its territory. The talks are being hosted by Belarus, close to the Ukrainian border. Ukraine has sent its defense minister and deputy foreign minister. Russia's delegation is led by its culture minister, raising questions about how seriously it views the negotiations. Ukraine says it's still successfully defending all its major cities, but there are reports coming in that dozens of civilians have been killed in Russian rocket strikes in the second largest city, Kharkiv. The Interior Ministry says hundreds more were wounded. Well, Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has been meeting with her Slovenian counterpart Andrzej Logar today, and they're due to give a statement shortly, which we'll bring to you live. And while we wait for that, I can speak to DW's chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane, more about Germany's reactions to Russia's attack on Ukraine. German Chancellor yesterday announced a complete turnaround in German foreign and security policy that's nothing short of a paradigm shift. What exactly are we looking at here?
That's right. And his words, by the way, were echoed by the Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, from whom we'll shortly be hearing both of them saying we are essentially now in a new world. February 24th, the Russian invasion of Ukraine changed everything. And quite concretely, what we heard the Chancellor sign up to, and also again reinforced by the Foreign Minister, arms shipments to Ukraine, breaking a long-standing German prohibition on sending arms to conflict zones. That prohibition, as the Foreign Minister has often explained, dating back to lessons learned from Germany's World War II experience, having instigated that war of aggression. Germany essentially has tied its hands on military and vowed never to send weapons to conflict zones, particularly if they might be used in a conflict involving Russian soldiers, because of the enormous suffering that Germany in World War II did inflict on Russia. So that's one of the measures that was then affirmed yesterday. Also, a massive increase in defense spending. Again, a very, very unusual departure from Germany's long-standing sense that diplomacy and dialogue are the key tools of foreign policy.
I have to interrupt you there, Melina. I'm sorry, but the two foreign ministers are beginning their statements to the press. Let's listen in.
Schönen guten Tag, meine sehr verehrten Damen und
Good
Herren.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dear Andrzej, welcome to Berlin, and thanks for visiting us here today. We have very important days deciding the fate for Europe and in particular for Ukraine. When we met for the first time 2 months ago during the Council of Ministers of Foreign Affairs, nobody would have thought that your first visits in Berlin would take place at a time when we see a war of aggression in Europe. That is why it's so important to have you here. It shows that we as Europeans stand together. And we stand together for our values and our peace order. Today is already the fifth day of Putin's war on Ukraine and against innocent people in Ukraine. It inflicted enormous suffering on Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing. Millions are afraid for their lives, are afraid of their future. We see awful pictures, but we are resolved. And the Ukraine is not alone. Europe, the Western community of values, firmly supports the courageous people of Ukraine. And we have shown that we as Europeans are much more capable of taking action than some people would have thought we are. And in particular, President Putin wouldn't have expected us to be so resolved. We have decided a package of sanctions, an unprecedented one, and the effects of that package will be felt by the Russian president and his environment. They will feel it in the markets, and they will also feel it personally. Putin's war has been a watershed, and it is absolutely appropriate for us to reassess everything we thought we would know for sure. And that is why we as Europeans, we as Germans, support women and men in the Ukraine. They are fighting a war to survive, and they are going to get, as our support, further weapons and equipment. We also do everything we can to provide humanitarian assistance to the Ukrainians. 160 million were made available, and further humanitarian aid is going to be made available, and we help those people who flee from the Ukraine. I would like to thank our Eastern European neighbours for what they have already done. We are able to provide assistance. We are together at the border in order to provide direct help and assistance to the people coming from Ukraine. And we can bring people to all countries of Europe. In Germany, we already have large-scale mobilization of resources. And I would like to thank the people, all the many people in Berlin and many other places in our country and all over Europe who took to the streets to demonstrate. We are Europeans. We have a unity of values, and that is why together we support the Ukrainian nation, and we are going to accept all the refugees. 30 years ago, in spring 1992, our two countries, the reunited Germany and the independent Republic of Slovenia, started diplomatic relations. Ever since then, we have been together, we have developed together in Europe. We have moved along a path towards a European peace order. This has been called into question in recent days. We have built up things over 30 years, and this common peace order needs to be defended now. Ivanje, we agreed today that Russia's behavior is not only a danger for Europe, it is a danger for the peace all over the world. That is why the General Assembly of the United Nations must take action now. It is now time to condemn the Russian leadership and their aggression and to isolate them on a worldwide scale. That is why we call upon all the countries of the world, all those who believe in the Charter of the United Nations, to be together and during the General Assembly to condemn Russia. Ivanje, your visit now takes place when we have a war in the Ukraine, but still we could today briefly also talk about our bilateral relations, especially when it comes to climate action and all the things we've done in recent years in order to mitigate the climate crisis. And we talked about how we can achieve our common goals in Europe. And these days show that climate policy is always security policy, and that is why we are going to work together as Europeans, and we are also going to continue our bilateral work, and we are going to intensify our work. I would like to thank you for this visit, although the topic of the day was not so much focused on our bilateral relations, but it is so important for us to get together, to visit each other and be together in order to show that we stand together against this Russian aggression. Thanks for your visit.
Annalena, vielen Dank für das
Thank you, Annalena, for this meeting today. It is my second official visit to Berlin. I was here last year as well. And you're right. 2 months ago, we met for the first time during the EU summit of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs. And you have just said that you were still a Minister of Foreign Affairs that hasn't been in office for 100 days. But all our ministers of foreign affairs recently have met 4 times because of the crisis. And so I do not have the feeling you just started being in office recently. Germany is the most important economic partner for Slovenia. About 17% of all our exports and our exchange of goods are with Germany. And the year 2021 was a very successful year. And we also had a very successful 2019 year. It is an action plan that we have decided upon to develop further our relations until 2024. I have invited you to come to Slovenia once our agreement is fully coordinated, and we hope very much that in future our cooperation, the cooperation between the Federal Republic of Germany and Slovenia, will be fruitful, and we will have even further and closer ties. It is true. The main discussions today were focused on the security of Europe, of the world at large. Recently, everything has been focused on Ukraine. Everything has been focused on the Russian war of aggression. And I can speak on behalf of Slovenia. I would like to thank Germany for having taken the decisions we heard about in recent days. Thank you also for your decision to invest more into the security of the European Union, the security of Germany. And I can say that in the light of the decisions that were presented in Bundestag regarding cooperation, security, I feel more secure having heard that. I can also say that in the European Union, we have shown during the last week what it means to be Europeans. We can be proud. We can be proud that we have become actors guaranteeing the security. We have been able to take decisions to guarantee our security. I think we have a very clear-cut image of what is happening in Ukraine. And the security concept of the world will be put to a test in Ukraine, maintaining the peace order that we have known for such a long time, maintaining our system of values that we believe in will have to be done now. That is why we together, in the framework of the EU, must make sure we maintain our security, we maintain the values that are the basis of the European Union. And that is why I think the communication of the EU leadership, the communication that we've seen coming from the ministers of foreign affairs of the EU, are the most positive symbol in the light of what is currently happening. And that is why we hope very much we can continue our fruitful cooperation with our transatlantic partners, so that we can really defend our system of values. We have also discussed the important question of the Western Balkans. Slovenia supports the Berlin process. Slovenia does everything we can in order to make sure that the Western Balkan region can be integrated. Minister Baerbock has already introduced her views, and I have also explained the position of Slovenia. And you know that during the Slovenian presidency in the EU, we are going to, or we have organized a summit on the Western Balkans, and we have tried to listen to the opinion of everyone concerned. That is the basis for our future work. And, of course, we would like to have the full support, and we'd like to thank you very much for supporting us in finding a common solution. And thanks for supporting us to find a perspective.
Polona Fijavž, Slovenska radio in televizija, vprašanje za oba ministra.
I come from the Slovenian broadcasting station. A question to both ministers.
Včeraj ste zunanja ministrica Baerbock dejali,
We are witnessing a tidal change, a paradigm shift of German politics. We woke up to a new world requiring a new political response. It also calls for an enlargement of the European Union. Would something like that be supported by Germany? We have heard positive opinion about that from Slovenia and Poland. And what would be the perspective for the implementation of such a proposal that is also supported by Ursula von der Leyen? Indeed, we are now in a different world. And we were taken to this new world because of Putin's war of aggression. Everything we took for granted, and we as the younger generation, me and my colleague, we grew up in peace. And we thought it would be normal for our children to grow up in a free Europe. And this firm belief we used to have was threatened because one man, Vladimir Putin, started this aggression. And that is why yesterday in German Parliament we said very clearly that every country of the world has a chance and has the right to defend itself. And we firmly support Ukraine. We are going to have a very restrictive armaments control, export control policy. But this is now the time where we have to support innocent people in Ukraine so that they can defend their security. When we look at the question of EU accession, it is not the case that we are in a new world now. The European Union has always said we are a house with open doors. The Ukraine is part of the common house Europe, and we know that many Ukrainians wanted and want to have closer ties to the European Union. As far as the EU is concerned, we do not have the situation that Russia portrays. We are not isolating ourselves. There are so many institutions beyond the EU that want to make sure we together defend our peace and security. The President of the European Commission yesterday once again emphasized an accession to the EU cannot be done overnight, just within a couple of months. It takes a deep and comprehensive transformation process. And this is what it means for all countries, and that is why together with our colleagues we have said, when we look at the Western Balkans, it is very important to show that we are fully committed to building our common house Europe. Thank you. I told the federal minister today that there is a letter sent to the European Commission by our Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Poland. 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, Slovenia has embarked on a similar path, and the recognition of Slovenia gave our people the hope that they would never be alone when the going gets tough. They would be able to defend themselves. We just remind the aggression of the Yugoslav army, and we decided to move towards an accession to the EU. We underwent reforms. We see many similarities with the situation in Ukraine, and we think that a European perspective for the EU is a very important argument. It gives the citizens of Ukraine an additional reason to defend the European system of values. In the Ukraine, there is bloodshed. The blood of Ukrainians is being shed in order to defend the values we all stand for. And that is why I support Ukraine. And I'm very happy that we now have a discussion also in German Parliament about that. And I'm very happy about the decisions that were taken by Germany regarding security. And that gives me optimism, that gives me hope that at the end of the day, we will be rational, take rational decisions. At the moment, we see so many irrational things being done. We see murder committed, but we also have reason and hope. Reason, reasonable action and hope are very important so that the Ukraine can really defend our common values. A question to the two ministers. First of all, the Russian president has increased the state of alert of nuclear missiles. Do we see a threat of a nuclear war given the arms deliveries coming from the EU and NATO? And a question to you, Minister Baerbock. The Germans in Russia, will they be called back to Germany? We have heard the statement of President Putin, and having seen the events of recent days regarding this war of aggression, we really have to take his threats very seriously. But let me once again say crystal clear, NATO is not a threat for Russia. This war was started by Russia, and Putin can stop this war any time. And I call upon Russia to refrain from such escalating statements. As far as German citizens in Russia are concerned, yesterday we have already said very clearly that in the face of the fact that our airspace is closed to Russian airlines and also German airlines no longer have the opportunity to fly. And that is why we have said that German citizens can still leave the Russian Federation. We are in a situation we are not sure what the next days are going to bring. And everyone that doesn't want or need to stay in Russia will have the opportunity, and we are going to assist them in order to return. And therefore, embassies will also look at the individual situation of family members of German citizens.
Tako kot ministrica Anna-Lena, tudi sam trdim, da je treba
as the federal minister has said, I also can say we have to take every statement seriously. Although this statement might sound crazy, recent events have shown us that the rational thinking of some leaders was overestimated by us, and that is why I think we are no longer in a situation where we can choose between good and bad solutions. We only have bad solutions at the moment, and the lesser evil would be to take sanctions that will indeed have an effect on the Russian economy, and that might also be a dilemma for the Russian population. They may wonder, is it really correct of Putin to act the way he does? And so we think that the unity that the Western world has demonstrated is the strongest answer when it comes to the threats and dangers emanating from there. The threats are not going to stop anytime soon. Now even Sweden and Finland think about joining NATO, and as soon as they said something to that effect, immediately there were statements coming from Russia regarding retributions. That was one drastic example. When we ask ourselves, why does Russia attack Ukraine? Russia allegedly does that because Russia never wants to be a neighboring country of NATO, and that is why they don't want Ukraine to join. And what happens now? Russia wants to conquer Ukraine, and Ukraine is a country that borders on several NATO member states. That would be an additional proof of the fact that all the statements coming from the Russian side are not very credible. They try to justify their violations of international law, and here I think we again have to take common action, and we need to make clear that we are defending our common values, and we are not going to stop there. We are going to be at the side of our partners.
Vielen Dank, Richard Walker. Yes, if I may ask the question in English for our international viewers. I have a question for you both regarding refugees and whether we're witnessing a sort of hierarchy in attitudes to refugees. First of all, we have increasing evidence that people from African countries who got stranded in Ukraine and are now trying to escape are receiving prejudicial treatment both at the border and also in some places in Ukraine itself. Could you give me your reaction to that? And Minister Logar, the Slovenian government recently published a tweet that said that Ukrainian refugees come from a culture and a religion that's different from those that came from Afghanistan a few years ago. It then deleted the tweet, but could you explain, is that the attitude of the Slovenian government that there is a sort of hierarchy of refugees in your eyes? Thank you.
Kar se tiče migrantskega vprašanja, gre za vojno območje.
As far as your question about the migrants is concerned, well, there is war, and Slovenia has already explained that we are willing and ready to share the border of accepting refugees. So we have said we are going to provide all possible assistance to give a shelter to those refugees. We also must say that Slovenia also is going to provide humanitarian assistance. We are going to do everything we can in order to help in those wave of refugees. During the time of the Yugoslav war, about 100,000 Bosnian refugees stayed in Slovenia, and we can say that at that time we have fulfilled our task in an excellent way. I myself participated. I was still at school, and I had some classmates coming from the war regions. And so I think our open society still exists today, and in that sense, Slovenia is going to do everything it can to help refugees. As far as the other questions are concerned, I think you can judge us as soon as we have shown what we will do, what we do in this wave of migration and refugees.
This is maybe something which unites us also in our generation as ministers, as politicians, that we realize what it means to flee as a child from another region when we had the conflict at the Balkan. I mean, Slovenia was even closer, but also in Germany those days I experienced the same. Having children in my class which had to flee their home country and seeing how important it is to be a friend, to be a partner, to be a safe home for those who had to flee in the past. And this is now again the situation showing that Europe stands united. When innocent people are suffering, that we're giving shelter to all of them. And I underline here, to all of them. And this is why we agreed again yesterday in the foreign ministers meeting, but also, as I know from the other ministers, especially the interior ministers, to underline that we are taking all the refugees. And again, thanks to the countries directly at the borders, organizing everything on the ground. And you are mentioning that there are problems which we are looking at closely for those civilians which are not having Ukrainian passports, because this is, in these horrible times, the good thing that for Ukrainians we have already the situation that they can enter the European Union without any visa. So we can be really, really quick at the borders, and that we are going to agree that people can stay in the European Union without too much bureaucracy. And also for those who do not have Ukrainian passports, this is our responsibility to give also those shelter. We from the German side are also definitely preparing all the preparations. We are in talks with other countries like Israel, also with countries from Asia, where we know that they have citizens in Ukraine to help organizing when they enter the European Union. And we stand here in close solidarity, not only as a European Union, but also with our friends in the US, in Canada, and many, many other countries worldwide.
Und die letzte Frage kommt von Herrn Schulze.
And the last question, Mr. Schulze from Taz.
Ja, eine Frage zu den
A question regarding.
That was the press conference of the two foreign ministers of Slovenia and Germany that we brought to you live. And to talk a bit more about this, I'm now joined by our chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane. Melinda, pretty straightforward press conference of two foreign ministers who are basically on the same page, two allies. So what stood out for you?
Except that, unlike most press conferences of this nature, they scarcely talked about their bilateral relations. There was a brief reference to what they're doing in the area of climate, but essentially this was all about, and that's hardly surprising, the conflict that we're currently seeing, that Russia's invasion into Ukraine. The first thing that stood out for me was hearing the references by the Slovenian Foreign Minister, Mr. Logar, to the Yugoslav wars, because we're often saying the first major conflict in Europe since the Cold War or since World War II, but in fact, it's not. The Balkan Wars of the 1990s occurred in many ways under similar circumstances, or at least with a similar catalyst. It was Slovenia's declaration of independence from the former Yugoslavia, the dissolution of Yugoslavia, that essentially precipitated the war. It first began with Serbia and Croatia, and then went on, of course, to Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina with terrible suffering. I covered those wars, and they were bloody, and they went on for a long time. So few leaders are better placed, I think, to feel empathy for what's happening in Ukraine than those of the Western Balkan, and we heard him say that. And we heard him then say what joining the European Union meant to them following that conflict. And indeed, we heard really ringing affirmations from both foreign ministers here of the new significance and sense of solidarity within the EU. So Germany's foreign minister said, we are showing that we have capabilities that few people would have thought we had just a few days ago. And he said, I feel proud to be a European at this moment. And indeed, it is a rare sense of EU unity that we're getting, particularly on the question of refugees. And they also addressed the question of EU membership for Ukraine in precisely this topic. We're hearing increasing suggestions that, well, if Ukraine can't join NATO, perhaps it could at least join the EU. The German foreign minister reminded us... Right? Exactly. She said, you know, that doesn't happen overnight. As we know, the EU has strict requirements like NATO. One of them is that democracy functions well, that a government is transparent and stable, and Ukraine still has some work to do in that area. Nonetheless, the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and also Slovenia have said they firmly stand behind an EU membership for Ukraine. The German foreign minister sort of hedged her words on that, but clearly in the face of the fact that the EU has now pledged 500 million for the first time in military support to Ukraine. That enhances the attractiveness now of being a member of the EU, even in terms of security policy.
Foreign Minister Loga also mentioned yesterday's landmark decision, really, of Germany, particularly Germany, not just the EU, to sort of increase their defence budget and deliver weapons to Ukraine. And he basically indicated that he now feels more secure after this announcement. Do you think that's a sentiment that is shared across small countries in Eastern Europe, neighbouring countries of Ukraine?
It may be an incipient sentiment in that direction, and it reflects what we heard yesterday from Foreign Minister Baerbock, who said that Germany was shedding a long-term sense of self-restraint. Essentially what we were talking about just before the press conference began, Germany sensed that because of its World War II history, it essentially had to tie its own hands when it came to military might and focus entirely on diplomacy and dialogue. And yesterday's decision by the Chancellor, supported by the Foreign Minister, supported even by the head of the opposition, to vastly increase German defense spending, to send weapons exports to a war zone, a prohibition until now for Germany. All of this shows Germany willing to now start to take a responsibility commensurate with its economic might in the security field. But we know it is going to take a long time to remedy the serious weaknesses and deficits within the German military. The Bundeswehr, drastically under-equipped. The Chancellor referred to gaps in every area: hardware, software, skills, cyber, logistics, across the board. Before Germany can become a strong security partner, it's going to have to do a lot of homework, and it's going to have to spend a lot of money. But at least we're seeing the beginning, and that may then make a difference in terms of common European security policy.
Melinda, also, our colleague Richard Walker was at the press conference, asked a question that referred to reports that non-Ukrainian people who actually tried to flee Ukraine and cross the border were held up. And there was also a controversial statement, apparently, from a Slovenian politician about that. And Baerbock said all refugees are welcome, not dependent on passport. Is there unity in the EU?
Not precisely. It's really fascinating to compare the situation now with the situation in 2015. As you remember, it was because of Hungary's extremely restrictive policy on immigrants who were coming from the Middle East, from Syria, also from Afghanistan, essentially Hungary shutting down its borders, that persuaded Angela Merkel to take her revolutionary decision to open the German border and let in 1 million refugees, which proved to be a very traumatic event here in Germany, now managed well, but it took quite some time. Compared to that, what we're seeing now is some of the same countries that held back in 2015, Hungary, that were very reluctant to see Middle Eastern refugees enter, Poland, of course, as well, now welcoming with open arms Ukrainian refugees. So it's not only Slovenia having made that statement, which later, as he pointed out, was then deleted from the webpage, but a general attitude amongst Eastern European countries that neighbor Ukraine, that they're willing to take in these refugees from Ukraine because they are like us, but we're very resistant to taking in the others. And this is a very real issue and is definitely requires some hard thinking and some examination on Europe's part about whom do we welcome and to whom do we close our doors. Foreign Minister Baerbock attempted to address that point in a diplomatic fashion, but it's even in the midst of thankfulness that many countries are showing a welcoming stance. It's a very open question that needs an answer.
Melinda Crane, our chief political correspondent, thank you very much for this analysis. And now it's time for a quick recap of the latest developments. Ukraine and Russia are holding their first talks since Russia's invasion, now in its fifth day. Ukraine says it is demanding a ceasefire and the withdrawal of Russian troops from its territory. The talks are being hosted by Belarus, close to the Ukrainian border. Ukraine has sent its defense minister and deputy foreign minister. Russia's delegation is led by